So when Pastor JJ first asked me if I wanted to give the sermon, I was really excited. And then he said, "Hey, can you worship service as well?" Never done that before, so that's been fun. But when he first asked me, a Bible verse first came to mind. A Bible verse that I have had in part of my life. And in that week when he asked me, it came up at 3 different times with him, one of my friends who's in the Philippines, and then one of my coworkers. And it's a fairly popular verse that most of you have probably heard of, which is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. It is one of the most misinterpreted Bible verses in the Bible, and you see it everywhere. And probably if you go to a Christian store right now, you'll see it on 3 different things: t-shirts, signs, magnets. It's everywhere. Now, we see it time and time again, Christians cherry picking scriptures out of the Bible and taking the meaning out of context. For I know the plans I have for you. Sounds pretty great. God has our back. He knows what he wants with our lives. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Okay, I like this. It's getting better. Life is going pretty great. We're prospering. Things are going our way. They're not harmful. Plans to give you hope and a future. So he does see a future for us. Now, if we break down just that one verse in the Bible, it breaks down to God knows what will happen to us. Those plans will be beneficial, and they won't be damaging to our lives or our future. But do you notice a common thing when we look at just that one verse? It focuses on the we and how it benefits us now and not the struggle before or after. The common problem with this verse is a lot of people look at it and think, hey, God's got our back and everything's going to be great. Right now. It's going to be great right now. So if God only wants good things for me, like the verse is talking about, then why did my car break down? Why didn't I get that job I interviewed for multiple times? Why did I just break my leg? How can anything bad happen to me if this passage is true? The problem with a lot of Christians is we want our struggles to be taken care of right away. We might ask ourselves, why not? God's an all-powerful being. He created the earth and the stars and everyone sitting in this room. So why can't he take care of our problems with a snap of his fingers? He can, but what would he be learning if we did that? As Christians, we look at God as a vending machine. If I pray, then my prayer will be granted right away. His goal is to help us grow. So I ask you, what would we be learning if he gave us everything we asked for? Now, if we go back to the Bible verse and read before and after that passage, it will give us a clear picture of what God is trying to tell us, of what we just heard from Jeremiah 29. Now, if we break down the whole passage, it talks about how God sent a letter to Jeremiah, and the Israelites they were exiled from Jerusalem and sent to Babylon. It was a 4-month trip one way to get to Babylon, and they were banned from their home country. They could never return. The king banned them. And when they got there, their new home, God says, stay here, live your lives, prosper, pray, have families, and just be good people. And during that time, others will test you and pull you away from you and try to deceive you. But pray for your safe return, and in 70 years, you'll be able to go back home to Jerusalem. After those 70 years, you can go home and everything will be good again. But in the meantime, this is where Jeremiah 29:11 comes into play during the waiting period. It's a reminder of God's people that answers will come. He wants us to pray to him. He wants to hear our voices with our whole hearts, but in the end, everything will be okay. But 70 years is a lifetime. Generations went past before they're able to return home. Our eternal timeline with God is a lot bigger than our own personal timeline, especially on earth. It's bigger than what we think matters in the moment. It doesn't always match up to God's plan or what He wants for us. If you look back when you're in college, high school, or middle school, I bet you can think of a situation with your friends, sports team, or school club, which you thought was the most important part of your life. Could have been a party that you wanted to go to, a Friday night game, and if you didn't go, then your world would just end. We know that when it really happened, but as a teenager, you have that mindset that one event could affect your whole life if you just didn't go. About 10 years ago, when I was a sophomore in high school, I lied to my parents about something that didn't even matter. I can't even remember what the lie was. That's how little importance it had on my life. But I do remember that my parents wouldn't let me go to my friend Lauren's party. I was devastated. I begged them, I pleaded that, let me go, I'll do something else. I'll mow the lawn for a month, I don't care. Let me do something else. To let me go to this party, to my friend's house. Unfortunately, they still said no. I thought my whole life was over because I couldn't go to this one event, even though I hung out with my friends at their houses every other weekend. I had to do the one thing that I thought that was most embarrassing thing as a teenager. I had to call my friend. Yes, we still called when I was in high school. Call my friend back and tell her I couldn't come. And tell all my other friends I wouldn't be there. I was crushed. That I would miss all the jokes and the pictures they took. But in reality, looking back at that event a decade ago, it had no significant impact on my life. What we think is important at a certain time in our lives isn't important in the grand scheme of life. Sometimes what we think we need isn't what God actually wants for us. It's like the saying goes, if you want God to laugh, tell him your plans. In those moments of struggle, God's people prayed and worshiped to wait to go back to their homeland. They turned away against evil beings, and it's in the waiting that we show our true strength and loyalty to God. It would be easier if all our prayers were answered right away, but what would we be learning? And it's really easy to worship when everything is going great in our lives. It is the true test when struggles appear. It reveals our true character on who we are and how we handle the moments of doubt with God. Everyone has struggled with waiting for answers at some point in their life, doubting that everything is going to be okay. We wouldn't be human if we didn't doubt God once in a while. When my dad was diagnosed with blood cancer in June 2015, I shut out God. I turned away from him for a while. I even distanced myself from my friends and my family for most of the year. I didn't want to worry them with my problems, what I was dealing with at school, thinking that if I did, then somehow it would cause my dad's cancer to get worse. In 2015, my dad had been staying at the hospital for his care after he had his transfusion. My mom and I visited him one of his days during his recovery, and he was doing great. We went home, got to see my sister again, and then we received a phone call a couple hours later that my dad was being rushed into the ICU. Luckily, my uncle was there, so he was able to tell us what was happening. My sister, mom, and I quickly grabbed our things to drive to Henry Ford. I went outside waiting in the cold for my uncle's brother and my aunt who was picking us up. I started to scream at God because I wanted him just to snap his fingers and make everything okay. I yelled at him saying, "Why are you doing this?" When we arrived at the hospital, they told us they didn't think he was going to make it in through the night. We said our goodbyes and waited all night long, getting very little sleep. And by the grace of God, my dad made it through. At one point, the doctors even told us during his recovery that he didn't think he was going to be able to walk again. And 24 hours later, he was dancing in his hospital room. While he was still in the ICU, I had a moment alone with my dad in his ICU room. And it was just this amazing talk. And it was a turning point of when I started to come back to God. It was my dad who showed me true strength in the waiting. The person I was turning away from because I didn't want to worry with my problems was the person I should have gone to in the first place. He showed me the power of waiting and the strength God can give you. I focused too much just on the verse of Jeremiah 29:11 and not on the bigger picture. I was cherry picking to make myself feel better rather than just actually trusting in God and his plan. God knows the plans he has for us, and it will be amazing, but he does it in his own time. It might take a month, a year, or even a decade to answer your prayer. And a lot of times it's not in the way we would even recognize. He does it in his own way because in those times of struggles and waiting for God's answers, he wants us to focus on him, to pray, and support each other. God will come. All you have to do is ask, just as it says at the end of that passage. If you come wholeheartedly, he will come to us, he will listen to us, and good things will happen. But remember, it is in his timing, and sometimes his answers could be no. And as his children, we have to trust he knows what's best. Just like a parent tells a toddler no to not eat a whole tub of ice cream. They don't always know why, but we have to trust God knows why in the no. Jeremiah 29:11 can be an amazing verse if you remember how it got there. Just like your life, when you're going through struggles, it's easy to look at what's going wrong. But if you were to look back, I bet it's a whole lot different from where you started. Looking again at that famous verse, if it's a good promise to remember what God has given you. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. How can this passage help change our lives, taking it from what we used to do cherry picking to actually affecting it in a positive way? It could be dramatic just by the way you pray. Instead of asking God to give you something, ask to give you patience. Pray to see his timeline and not your own. Pray for understanding of why something is happening, and even start praying for accepting no as an answer. Because his design for your life is better than what you could have imagined. And in Romans 8:28, and we know in all good things God works for the good of those who love him, who have called according to his purpose. It's a great promise from God that he knows everything is going to be all right, as long as we remember that it'll happen in his way and his design and not our own.